Happy Monday, Broncos country. Welcome back to a very special episode of Let's Talk Broncos. Not only do I have Zach Seegers and Joey Richards here, I've got Frankie Abbott as well. Let's talk
Man.
Broncos. Let's talk draft the man. Guys, I want to tell you, fantastic job during the draft. It was a long weekend. You guys covered A through Z, and we're here to break it all down as the Broncos had five. Technically, we'll count a sixth pick, but we want to go over all the grades for these new Broncos who are coming in here and give a relative, breakdown for all of Broncos country as we start to kind of deal with the postmortem of the NFL draft. First of all, gentlemen, how are you? Frankie, I'm going to start with you.
Doing pretty good, like you said. The draft season is finally over. It feels like this massive wave, all this work of watching all these random clips throughout the year. It's finally come to fruition, and it's finally over, and we're through it. And we've got new Broncos, and there's new players on new teams, so it's an exciting time.
We love new Broncos, Frankie.
Oh yeah,
it's the best. I am doing great, Bree. Bold prediction: Nuggets in 4. That's how I'm feeling today. That's how I woke up. So it's Nuggets in 4.
How quickly you switch up, Joey. I was Nuggets in 5, and you were all Nuggets in 7.
Yeah, because I was being realistic at the time, but I woke up winning the game today, bro. So
it's looking like I was a little realistic.
I feel like the Squidward meme right now. I feel like the Squidward meme. I'm just looking from the outside. You guys get to talk NBA playoffs, and I'm just...
Hey, listen, I'm there at the game, so you know Chris Paul's going to get it. But anyways, that's all. Bree, Zach, how are you doing?
Sucks to buck there, Frankie. Sorry about it. Zach, how are you?
I'm doing great, Frankie. We can be like the the Predator meme, like Arnold Schwarzenegger and Carl Weathers, like Nuggets, Bucks,
exactly
up on the Suns.
I've joined in, that's the vibe now. I want to see KD lose. I want to see Jimmy Butler lose. I want to see the Celtics lose. Honestly, I want everyone to lose. The meteor can hit at this point. Yeah. It's all over. But the draft.
All right.
Draft. I'm excited for it. It's going to be a feisty episode. For most fiery episode in a while. I don't want to steal any more time. Let's talk some picks.
Let's talk some Broncos NFL draft picks. First off, we're going to start with the Broncos drafting Oklahoma wide receiver Marvin Mims with the 63rd overall pick. On the big board for Dane Brugler, he had him at the number 76 prospect. So a little bit off there. I think you're probably going to see a little bit of instant impact from the speedster. Guys, break it down for me. What did you think of this pick in specific?
Yeah. Bree, actually, Frankie, I want you to take the lead, bro. You do it. You take some lead on Mims.
I like the Mims selection a lot. I like him as a player. I think he fits a need of what they were looking for, to have more of a reliable speed threat. KJ Hamler kind of, through no fault of his own, through a lot of injuries, has kind of not been able to have a lot of availability throughout the years. So I think this kind of fills that, able to dictate coverages, able to get more passes open underneath. So it really fills that need. The move up, not necessarily something I love in a draft where they don't necessarily have an excess of capital, but if they were hearing rumors or rumblings that maybe the Eagles or one of the teams that were ahead of them at 67 or 68 was going to make that selection, I can understand why they'd make the move up. Just don't necessarily love it when there were other guys on the board I'd consider maybe in that same caliber of receiver, but I can't fault the team for saying, hey, we see a talent, we want to go out there and get it. I'd say he does kind of fit in that range of like between that 50 and 75 range. So, at the end of the day, I think they went out, they saw they needed to improve the passing attack this offseason. I think this is a player that definitely helps them do it. After watching the tape, after watching, kind of refreshing myself on him a little bit of a player, one thing I totally agree with was Sean Payton saying, like, this is a player that has effortless speed. Like you see some guys on tape and they fly, but this is truly someone that, like, it doesn't look like he's moving very quickly. He can change gears very easily, very sudden mover, decent release ability off the line, has a lot of inside-outside versatility. And another thing he touched on was his ability as a returner. One kind of theme throughout a lot of these picks is that they all have a lot of special teams experience. He is no exception to that. So I was a pretty big fan of the Marvin Mims pick. I'm not going to give it a perfect grade just because I do still think that there was the chance they could have maybe waited, not spent the excess capital, caught a receiver at least in a similar range at where they were at. But this is the Sean Payton era now where we're probably going to see a little bit more aggression and getting the guys they want.
Yeah, Frankie, I totally agree. And that on that last point, it kind of proves with the trade ups that Sean Payton, I think, had control of this. I don't think that's a very George Payton-y thing to trade up twice and use future capital, especially. We'll get to that later. To make, to go get your guy. That's more of a Sean Payton typical thing of what we've seen with him in the Saints. So, yeah, great point there. And I totally agree with you on Mims as well. I love the player, or I like the player, I'll say. Smaller framed guy, plays bigger. He is lead blocking a ton, right? So you're going to see that football competitiveness a lot in his film. I hated watching this last year. Dylan Gabriel was not great, and I've never seen so much Wildcat in my life. So it wasn't the most pleasant watch, especially when looking for a wide receiver. But then you went back, and you saw a lot more of him with Spencer Rattler and Caleb Williams and those guys at quarterback. And in that, I thought he was really good. He's a vertical threat. That speed is real. And he can really push down the field. But not only that, it translates with him after yards after catch. He has great vision. I don't think he's really juking people out, but he is finding angles and outrunning people and stuff like that. So I like it. Although he does come with all of the issues that you typically get in a smaller receiver, right? You're going to lack the catching radius. You're going to lack the maybe ability to fight through contact all the time. Too many times you saw people push him off his route. That was something that scared me. That happened quite a bit in his film. And then you have to wonder, in the NFL, can he play on the outside? He rarely played against press coverage on the outside, so you didn't get to see a lot of his release packages. When you saw it, it looked good, but you didn't really see it that often, so worry about him only being slot dependent. Overall, though, good pick. Sean Payton has only drafted 3 receivers in the top 2 rounds, and those 3 guys are Mike Thomas, Brandon Cooks, and Robert Meacham. So great company to be in.
Yeah, I'm a fan of the pick. I like replacing KJ Hamler, if I'm being honest. I think KJ Hamler is an amazing human being. I want to see him succeed, but the Broncos need this type of player, this type of vertical threat in their offense, especially the way Sean Payton is building this, kind of a throwback to the Pete Carroll days. And I think Marvin Mims fits that well. I think Joey's points about, the Big 12 receiver, working against press and everything. Those are fair concerns. I think he is probably slot dependent. But what I do love to see from him, and it sounds like a small thing, but he's a really natural catcher of the football. It just comes easy to him. And I think it's honestly rare with this kind of small burner archetype that you see natural catchers of the football. The KJ Hamler flaw, where I feel like high drop rates, and some of that is their ability through contested catches and whatnot, is very high. I think he's a very natural catcher of the football. I think that's going to allow him to, that paired with his speed, is going to allow him to find an instant impact role in the offense. He might max out as just a good role player, but I do think like he has a fairly high floor as just that. The trade up is insane. Like just a really poor understanding of value, a negative 109 differential. Like they gained 30 some points on their move up, and they lost like 140 on the move down in the 5th round. They traded a trade up of 5 picks for a move down of 50 picks. But if you look at modern trade value charts, the Mr. Irrelevant pick is worth 190 points. So that 109 differential, like, yes, it's a stupid trade, but it's not even worth like the very last pick in the draft. It's an error, but not a horrendous one, like we will talk about in a little bit. So it doesn't knock my grade too much. I would say like I'm feeling a good B here. I don't know. I'm a fan of actually PB minus. I don't know. I'll go B. I'm gonna be negative later.
Okay, B.
I think a B minus is a little negative. I gave him a B, but I have a question. You guys mentioned KJ Hamler a couple of times. What is the skill set difference in Mims being an instant impact player, kind of being able to just shoot straight out, be a little bit, maybe not quicker, but more enviable when it comes to having Russell Wilson as his quarterback, being touted as, I would say, playing bigger than his build suggests? Does that offer a different skill set than what you would see out of KJ Hamler? And could you see a reality in which both players have a piece on this depth for the wide receivers on the Denver Broncos?
Yeah, Frankie, take it, man.
As far as if I can really see them having the depth, it's really tough unless they look to make a trade. Their receiver chart right now is, I'd say, 6 or 7 deep. You think about the addition of Marquez Callaway, you still have guys like Kendall Hinton on this roster. One or multiple of the people I think in this building are probably going to look to be moved, either for some late picks next year, or possibly they look to try to bring in a running back that's due for the cut, or that's looking to get cut throughout training camp. I think that's a possibility. As for the differences in their game, I think one thing that you mentioned is Marvin Mims having the ability to play the special teams, but I think Mims plays a little bit better in the air. I think he's a little bit more better of a contested catch guy, where I think KJ actually has a little bit more of a route diversity to him. I think KJ actually offers you a little bit more than just than just the deep ability. I do think KJ actually has a little bit you can utilize him underneath a little bit more, but I don't know, because you didn't really see that too much as to what Mims was asked to do at Oklahoma. So those are the differences I see there. But yeah, I have a tough time imagining both those guys getting kept around as much as I'd like to see them. But especially with the direction we're seeing this team go, where they seem to want to be very run heavy, run focused, run first, they're going to have, I think, an extra tight end than you're expecting. They've already signed Michael Burton, who seems like a lock to just be their pure fullback. It's tough to, really rationalize having two of these, true vertical speed threats. And again, I think the big differentiator is going to be the ability to play special teams, as it's going to be for a lot of these rookies.
Frankie, what's your overall grade for Mims?
I'll go B. I'll go B as well.
All right,
I'll go
Joey.
C. C, because of I like the player, but I didn't like the trade. The trade is kind of minuscule in the grand scheme of things, but if someone picked Mims, it wouldn't have bothered me, because 6 wide receivers went in the same round, or literally he was the last pick of the second round. So the round after that, 6 wide receivers went, all of which I thought were similar in my grading. So that's just the reason why.
All right, guys, thanks. We'll move on to the next pick. The 67th overall Broncos draft Arkansas linebacker Drew Sanders. This one has created a little bit of tension here, I think, within the LTB crew. A big athlete, I think, tremendous presence. You've got a lot of upside, and then you have the versatility in both passing and run defense. Pro Football Network basically called this one of the best picks of the 2023 draft. The consensus among LTB doesn't seem to fall in that realm. Frankie, I'm going to start with you. Lead us off. Tell us what you thought and give us an overall grade.
So I'm very back and forth on this selection, because on one hand, I think that Drew Sanders here makes sense. I think that his selection here is a value. I think that he was probably around the 65th, maybe 50th best player on the board. I think that's completely accurate. Where I struggle is when you look at the current middle linebacker depth chart, it's hard to really factor in where you're going to be getting so many snaps without kind of taking away from some of these other guys. And if you're taking away from these other guys, that's fine. I guess then I have concerns about them handing out the contract to Alex Singleton. Not that it's super big money, but I just have a little bit of concerns about that. Drew Sanders as a player, super great athlete, a guy you can really see molding into that true inside linebacker of the future. Really good blitzing presence, not so much of a cover guy yet, but when you talk about a guy who, this guy I think is going to be one of the guys you're looking at to be a building block of this defense going forward, I'm just not so sure that he's necessarily the right selection. And when you talk about that this team is just been on such a slide for so long now, it's just hard to really rationalize, in my mind, the inside linebacker selection. So that's where I'm back and forth, because when you talk about positional value, I don't think it makes a lot of sense to go get your 4th string inside linebacker, maybe 3rd string if they move on from a Jonas Griffith in the training camp, or they end up cutting him. But I just don't love that selection. If it all ends up working out, this is a player who in the long run is probably only saving you $5 to $8 million. I think that's kind of a big part of it too. I think you kind of want to draft to kind of be able to save yourself money for when this huge Russell Wilson contract starts to hit in. He's not a player that's going to be doing that very much for you, unless you're considering cutting Josie Jewell next offseason, which I guess is fine, but that's kind of asking a lot of him. I just think I would have preferred to see them go in a little bit of a different direction, but I do also acknowledge the talent he is, and I'm not going to be upset about we said before this draft started, we talked about a bunch on me and Joey's show, this team just needs to add talent during this draft. This is a roster that's a little bit devoid of talent and is kind of looking to look towards that next generation of Broncos and needs to kind of get started on that process. So I'm not going to be mad with them adding a player that I think was a consensus top 75 pick, but I do think that there were better selections available. And I do think that, like, I see a lot of fans right now saying, like, oh, this guy was a consensus first rounder, yada, 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 yada. I don't think his tape really reflects that as much. I do see this as a guy that was going to last until the second or third round. Again, this is a guy that you're doing a lot of projecting when you're looking at him. He just spent his first season playing off-ball linebacker. There were warts on his tape, but you're believing that he can kind of iron those out, which I do believe a lot of the errors are iron-outable. But, like, not necessarily a player that you're thinking, oh man, this is going to be like our Luke Kuechly 10-year starter at inside linebacker who we were able to get in the third round. I don't think he's that level of player.
Mm-hmm. Zach, what do you think?
I want you to go first. I want to compliment Sandwich. I want a chance to rebut your positivity.
Okay, yeah, for sure. So I think here's my kind of, I don't know. So when I'm looking at like the value of it, right, I don't think I can change my draft philosophy going into this third round just because I didn't have a first or second. I don't think that makes much sense to me. I think that's how you catch yourself reaching, truthfully, when your board does incorporate positional value. So you set up your board how it is, you incorporate that. There's a reason why. I mean, I went down and I counted the premium positions each round going up to this. 23 of the 31 picks were at premium positions in the first, 19 of 32 were in the second, and then in the third, 15 of 32. It goes lower and lower because there gets to a point where it doesn't make sense anymore. We're on our 12th edge selected, and we're on our second linebacker. It just gets to a certain point where it doesn't matter anymore, and I think him as a player, he is the second best linebacker, in my opinion, in this class, if not the best linebacker in this class. It's not the strongest linebacker class in the world. It really isn't. It's not the strongest. But in this, I do have him as linebacker 1 or 2. So, and then you look at the guys that went after him. I mean, in the same round, we had DeMarvion Overshawn. I think he's much better than Dorian Williams, Trenton Simpson, Dayon Henley. Like, the list goes on. There were 5 linebackers selected after him. So I think it's consensus, and what it tells you by the NFL is that the third round was the sweet spot to take a linebacker. None were taken before that. 5 were taken in the exact same round after Drew Sanders. So I think that's kind of telling. When you look at the other people that were available, we're talking 6 wide receivers, 4 running backs, 5 linebackers, 4 defensive tackles, 3 tight ends, 2 safeties, 1 center, and a kicker. So I just don't see the premium position guy that I'm over heads and heels. I'm like, yes, he's the same caliber as player as Drew Sanders. So I don't hate it at all. You could probably make an argument for a couple guys. You definitely could. But overall, don't hate it. I think Drew Sanders is extremely athletic. I think his ceiling's through the roof, and it does definitely account for some projecting. But like I said earlier, we're in the third round. I don't think you're getting a ready product with anybody.
I agree with most everything Joey said. I think my thing is that's a good argument for why the average team should take Drew Sanders with around the 67th pick, and why if the Philadelphia Eagles did it, I think it's like an A pick. But for the Broncos, I don't love it. I think there's team fit concerns. He's got a ways to go with, I think, reading the game, his instincts, his feel for the game. I know he's only played the position for a year. To me, I wonder if that feel is something you naturally develop, or if it's going to take time with him playing through it. Like, that was a similar book on a guy like Jamin Davis, right? He had similar flaws and he was new to the position and fairly inexperienced and young and everything. But he hasn't had the chance to really play through and develop those instincts because the mistakes he makes hurt his team so much they've had to slowly dwindle his playing time. Drew Sanders isn't going to have that playing time off the bat, and so I wonder how much that can develop. And then once he finally gets playing time, how he's going to be able to do it. Then I also wonder about this staff in particular's ability to develop that. Vance Joseph has taken similar nebulous position, hyper athletic linebackers with maybe some feel or instinct questions or usage questions. And I don't think he's failed to develop any of them. He got Hassan Reddick working in his final year, but then got nothing out of Isaiah Simmons and nothing out of Zaven Collins. So I think that's a concern for me. Greg Minuski, the inside linebackers coach in charge of developing Drew Sanders, has coached inside linebackers for one season in the last 2 decades. And I don't think it's a wildly impressive one. And then the financial element, I think, is also concerning. The Broncos aren't the average team. They have very few picks and very little money. Yet they're still going to have to rebuild their offensive and defensive line, which are premium positions, very expensive areas to rebuild. When the time comes to rebuild that, it's going to be hard to do so. Rebuilding the linebacker core is a lot easier to do. We saw it with Alex Singleton. They spent $1 million and they found a dude worthy of all-pro consideration. Mm-hmm. And look at the all-pro votes at linebacker. Like 20, 25 guys got votes. Maybe it's because they're like 15, 20. But a ton, like way wider range than any position, because there's a lot of like, it's a plateau there of talent. They're kind of easy to come by. They're very replaceable. You don't have many options to dig yourself out of this financial Russell Wilson hole. It's like playing a football game. You're in the fourth quarter. You're at a 28-3 deficit, and you're taking 5-yard runs up the middle. In a standard setting, 5-yard runs up the middle is good offense. It's good process. It'll do you well. At this point, it's not going to serve you. You need bigger chunks. You need bigger plays. And even if Drew Sanders becomes a superstar linebacker, he's making up for $10 million of the Russell Wilson contract. If you found an average player, like that's what Marvin Mims will make up for you if he's a good number 3 receiver. So that's the thing. Like the bar for Drew Sanders to be worth this pick, to make up surplus value, he has to be like a perennial Pro Bowler. While Marvin Mims, if he's kind of an average starter, he makes up for the trade up and his pick slotting.
I got one more point then too, just about like the positional value. I don't think I'd worry too much about the positional value thing if then they didn't follow up by clearly saying, man, we really need a boundary corner for next season. And then they followed up by trading up for Riley Moss a little bit later. It's like, man, if you guys really viewed yourselves as in such need of a boundary corner that you were willing to give up another 3rd round pick to go up and get one a little bit later, maybe you should have just taken one with the Drew Sanders pick, and then you still have the XX capital sitting around. But instead, you looked at your roster and you said, we need one of these premium positions, and you did it. You know, there's a reason for that. It's because you spent your first 3rd round pick, it is your first 3rd round pick going after a position that wasn't necessarily a need. And it's kind of like, I think you got to kind of pick a side if you're Denver. I probably wouldn't be so upset at the Drew Sanders pick if they then, really sat pat and said, okay, we're not trading up so much this year, and we're just going to take the guys that are falling to us. I like that strategy, but they didn't do that consistently throughout, so it's just kind of confusing.
Frankie, you gave an overall grade of C. Is that correct?
Yeah, I'm going to do a C for Drew Sanders.
Joey, and you?
I'm going to give it an A.
I'm going to go C too.
I'm going to go B plus because I like the player. I like who they got. And I think the Broncos specifically wanted to reach up and grab that linebacker at that pick. I think that, if it was their best player available at that time, that they were going to make that move. I understand fundamentally both of your arguments about the player positional value there at that pick and then what they traded away in order to get to those. I just think at the end of the day, I should be better at segmenting out these draft choices instead of what the whole picture is, because at the end of the day, they got a pretty decent draft class. I know we'll have lots to talk about. So watch all this week on Let's Talk Broncos, because I want to break these down a little bit further. These are initial grades. Somebody already brought up Riley Moss, who will be the next player we will talk about. I think it's important to note that there was a ton of movement by George Paton and Sean Payton. Which of these moves were specifically to each? Joey, you've already referenced once already that you think a move was specifically a Sean Payton move. How do you feel moving into these next couple of picks? Give me your idea of what this breakdown is for Riley Moss, because I know there's concerns in his coverage for man versus zone, but I think he's experienced and I think he's a flashy player. Needed the depth in the CB room. We always talk about on Let's Talk Broncos how you can never have enough defensive back. So I'm not mad at this pick. I'm pretty excited about the moxie that Riley Moss is going to bring to the Denver Broncos. Joey, you first. Give me a breakdown here. How do you feel about the pick for the Denver Broncos?
Yeah, to me, it feels like a Christian Parker pick, but a Sean Payton philosophy. That's kind of what that's what it feels like to me. I think the Broncos knew they needed a boundary cornerback. Frankie has talked about this a ton. All the credit to him. Get yourself a freaky, athletic corner that Christian Parker can go develop. I'm sure this got his cosign here, so that's really good. But at the end of the day, the trade is a little spooky to me. I don't like the trade at all. This is the worst process, I think, of the draft here. It's just, if Broncos did feel like they had to go get one, that's fair. But to me, it just feels like more that they really like this player, because we're talking about a round that only 3 cornerbacks went in. All 32 picks, 3 were corners. So they obviously loved Riley Moss a ton. My big worry with Riley Moss, the player, isn't how fast he can run straight. It isn't how high he can jump. It isn't his tackling ability, which sometimes he, gets a little too aggressive in. I think he has really great ball skills. I think there's a lot to love here. He's a very high Q football player. Riley Moss is awesome. But the issue for me is just a little stiffness, and I don't prefer that in my corners. It is a position where you need to be fluid. You need to be able to keep up with people. I saw Riley Moss sometimes have a hard time getting in and out of his cuts as fast as a wide receiver is, and that's his job, right? So it's a little scary there. Overall, though, the player I don't mind, especially if the Broncos are moving into more of a cover 3 scheme, which Frankie also tweeted. So shout out to him for that. And then, yeah, I just really hate the process. So if I'm going to give it a grade, I'm going to give it a C-.
This one's tough because, I like Riley Moss. I've been on the Riley Moss train. Last year, I was enjoying watching him when he actually had his big interception number season. And he's a good player. He's a freak athlete. He's a guy that I think we're going to be excited to see if he gets the opportunity to pair outside with Patrick Surtain. But the issues do come in a little bit of his scheme limitations. I do think he is going to be purely that cover 3 corner, that you just kind of leave in that deep third, let him kind of play balls deep. I don't think he's got the mobility skills to be able to keep up with guys playing man. I do not believe he's going to be playing in the slot, and I'll be honest. This is a guy that has 2,000 career snaps at boundary corner. He has a lot of snaps on special teams as well. In my opinion, if you're moving up to go get a guy, it better be because you are so confident in his ability to play a specified role. I would really hate if they moved up to go get a guy. They're like, let's try him at safety. Let's try him at a spot that we don't know if he can play. In my mind, that's just not good process as well. If it ends up working out, sure. I just don't love too much of that, But it's the giving up the future 3rd round pick. This is a team, and I know that it came out, I believe it's the lower of the thirds between them and the Saints. So it's not necessarily guaranteed to be like the situation with Seattle this year where we're just watching
2 high 4th picks, 2 2 high 3rd picks.
2 high 3rd round picks. These are 2 teams that I do not think that if you were just to look at Vegas betting odds, I don't think either of these teams are projected to make the playoffs right now. I don't think that these are going to be teams that are going to have their rebuild completely finished after this past offseason. I think there are still going to be teams that are looking towards that rebuild. Giving up top 100 picks at that time is just not something you want to see. And again, you look at the job the Arizona Cardinals did this year where they were stockpiling picks for next season. There's a reason for that, guys. Next year's draft class looks really freaking good. Not only Caleb Williams, there's a ton of prospects that all look incredibly talented. You heard it time and time again from most of the top national people. This draft class, while it wasn't bad, just wasn't the strongest. It didn't have a ton of those blue chip talents. You kind of saw at the end of the first round when you're watching the Lions go after guys like Jahmyr Gibbs and Campbell, who I don't think are bad players in the slightest, but these are not the blue chip home run prospects I think you're really expecting in the top 20s of an NFL draft. There was a reason for that this year, and that's not going to be so much the case next year. And I think Denver just might be kicking themselves a little bit saying, man, we could have just been patient, waited to see what corner was still on the board for us, and then, let it kind of fall how it falls. While I like Riley Moss, another thing is I just have a hard time believing that they had him so highly ranked over guys I believe Tomlinson went after him. I believe Mekhi Blackman, went after him. There were corners that I had in a very considerable same range that, don't get me wrong, maybe Denver had differently. but I just don't think it was such a gap that they had to be like, we need to throw an extra top 100 pick to ensure we get Riley Moss versus this other guy. Darrell Luter Jr. is another guy I liked a lot. That's just where a lot of my issue comes with it. Like the player, really don't like the process. It probably ends up being around like a C- for me, maybe D+. And again, nothing against him. I just think it puts such heavy expectations on a guy that while I'm excited because it fills a need, they need a boundary quarter, they need a special teamer. I think there were better ways to go about filling that need than sacrificing future capital to do so.
Mm-hmm.
And I don't think they need a boundary corner here, if I'm being honest. Do they need to add some depth? Yeah, but I think they need veteran depth. I think you look at Damari Mathis and Patrick Surtain, and yes, everyone needs more cornerbacks, but you probably have your outside tandem for the future. And neither of those guys have played inside a lot. Surtain has done it a little, but he's better on the outside. And I think he's a little better being that chess piece you move around. Like we've been talking about in the DMs, the three of us, because I was thinking maybe you try and move Riley Moss inside, but I think you guys are right. That's probably not the answer either. So he's a versatile depth piece that can back up Justin Simmons at safety and Damari Mathis at corner. That's nice, but again, the Broncos they're not the Kansas City Chiefs. They're not even like the Chicago Bears. They are in a hole of capital. They are down 28-3 in the fourth quarter. You have to, the whole playbook's not open to you at that point in the game. You can't be spending two solid picks, 2 top 100 picks, just about. I guess it's 108, but 2 top 108 picks on a guy you're projecting as a backup corner. Because during the Russell Wilson, whether you think Russell Wilson's with this team for the future or they cut him the moment the 2023 season is done, you are saddled with a bloated quarterback contract for the next 3 years at least. If he's sticking around, it's 4. So you have to start thinking like you're a team building around a bloated quarterback contract. You have to start milking the value out of everywhere. If you're an NBA team building around I was talking with Ryan Blackburn about this at the Mile High Sports office today, trying to explain it to him. I'm like, yeah, I like the players they added, but it's like if you're building around a bloated Russell Westbrook contract, you have to find the value adds everywhere. And he was like, oh, totally. Maybe you're not making a big enough deal out of this. I don't know. It's just, what's the projection for Riley Moss? How's he digging you out of that hole? Because you have to put together a complete team, and you're trying to do it already with one hand behind your back with so much capital allocated to this player that is not delivering on it. So you have to find value elsewhere, and spending 2 almost top 100 picks on a backup defensive back is doing the exact opposite.
I'm not so sure he's going to be a backup. I mean, with the state of injuries in the NFL and specifically the Broncos, knock on wood, I could see him just playing opposite of Patrick Surtain. And I don't know if it's fair to put on the player as Riley Moss is to say that he needs to make up the gap, or the Broncos are dropping the ball and making up the gap on an inflated quarterback and head coach contract. So it's just interesting to me that that's how your guys' I'm not saying it's wrong. It's just my vantage point was I like the player pick in Riley Moss. I'm giving it an A. I'm a secondary defensive back girl. I like the idea of getting a cornerback and a secondary and a safety, who we're going to talk about next, thinking it's really important here. I get all the logistics, but to knock the player and the player grade down just specifically because the Broncos are in a hole that they've been digging for 7 years seems a little crazy to me, Zach.
But to me, I'm not grading the player. I think the grading player process was everything before what just happened. I think now we're in the grading the pick process. I might think a kicker's really a great kicker, but if you take him first overall, that's a really bad pick. Nothing against the kicker. The kicker might be a model citizen who is the best human being ever and kicks 100% on 60-yarders. But you're
telling me if you didn't know Justin Tucker was going to be Justin Tucker, you wouldn't have gone back into time and then tried to draft him first overall. Kickers are responsible for all the points on a team.
Bree, we're talking semantics. You know what I mean. It's not a good, like, we're not saying anything about like the kicker's a bad kicker, the kicker's a bad person, but it would be bad process to take a kicker first overall. Right. And I think Riley Moss is, I think, a good player. He's a good person. If the Broncos just sat at 108, it's a different story. But I'm grading the draft pick. I think the process is part of it. And I think the process was really bad here. It's a D+ to me.
Yeah, so I think the trade was really bad. I don't hate the position though, Zach. I feel like at some point we are limiting what position we can draft far too much. So we're not allowed to draft a linebacker. We're not allowed to draft a cornerback, any of the positions that aren't premium. So I imagine that would be tight.
You can draft a corner, but like I think what's the vision for Riley Moss that makes him worth 2 top 100 picks?
No, the trade, yes. But like, so it's just you could draft a corner, but you're making the argument that he's not going to play. Like,
what's the vision for him playing?
You can still draft a corner. It's the process of the trade that's not good. Dude,
what's the vision for him playing? I agree, but what's the vision for him playing?
No, I agree. I agree with you, Zach. I think that good football players will always find their way on the field. It's very often I just see guys go from one team, blow up on the next. Like, it happens, but it's rare. That's like they will find their way on the field. They will show their worth eventually. He's on a 4-year contract. He's going to find his way on the field.
But
so you have to end up doing that. Like, if we limit ourselves to only edge and offensive tackle, here's the issue. There was one offensive tackle draft in that entire round.
It's not just like, just don't trade up for it.
I guess
it's not just you can't draft a corner. Don't trade up this incredible value for it. And I'm not saying this is a rule for every team, but I know that's why I'm talking about it here. The Sanders one, I don't think you should draft a linebacker, and that's not a rule for every team. I think this is a good spot to draft a linebacker. It's a luxury pick for the Broncos. And they are at a place where I don't think they can afford luxuries. They are in a deep hole. I'll go back because I think it's the same analogy. It's a 6-yard run up the middle when you're down like 20 points in the fourth quarter. Like, yeah, a 6-yard gain on a run play is generally good football. In those circumstances, it's not. It's not digging you out of the hole fast enough.
I guess I'm sorry. I got 2 little counters. So I do believe, first of all, I will say I do think that Riley Moss does fill a position of need because I think we're a little bit, and this is nothing against Damari Mathis. I'm a huge Damari Mathis guy. Damari Mathis had one great season playing under a completely different defensive coach. So I think, there is also the possibility that, they want a little bit more insurance. Maybe he doesn't take the step forward they expect. Maybe he's not as good as this defensive scheme. I do think Riley Moss fills a need there. What I will say is, as far as me personally, how I viewed Riley Moss as a player, I viewed him as a top 100-ish player, probably should go around that 100th pick range. Where I have issue is moving up to go get him at pick 83 just feels like a reach. It feels like the consensus around the league is that's not necessarily where he was at. He's already a guy who's 23 years old. That's not like too old, but that is on the older end of the spectrum for a rookie. I just don't think that there was necessarily the push there that they needed to go get a guy. So I do view it as a bit of a reach, even though I do like the corner and I do think getting a boundary guy. And again, I'm going to keep emphasizing this. The special teams thing was clearly such an emphasis of theirs. They drafted 3 guys that have 450 plus special team snaps throughout their college careers. That is clearly something that they wanted to get resolved. So I think that's a big part of it. And the thing with them passing on the offensive lineman that's kind of a little weird too is just I do wonder if them getting the other offensive line coach would have seen them be a bit more aggressive. We did see them miss out on guys like John Michael Schmitz to the Giants at 57. I do wonder if we would have seen more aggression because they clearly were willing to move up. It's shocking to me we didn't see them leapfrog ahead of the Giants or whoever they needed to go get the center of the future they really wanted. So that's my final.
Thank you. I appreciate that. We're going to jump on over to the next player just because I don't know if I can fight any longer. It hurts my heart, makes me cry. Broncos draft Boise State safety J.L. Skinner with the 183rd overall pick. Guys, this one excited me quite a bit just because I like a hard-hitting safety with the potential with Kareem Jackson possibly leaving or maybe the door being open for him to come back. It still relates to the idea that they need a hard-hitting, through-the-middle, downhill specialist who's able to really hit hard. He had a quote, I believe, just the other day. Broncos Avenue is great with their graphics. They shot this one out immediately. I was claps all around, because I love the quote he had about, if you come around me, you're going to get hit. I want you to fear me. That alone gives me an A on JL Skinner. Frankie, tell me how you feel about this pick.
Love it. I mean, this is kind of a perfect example, kind of like the Drew Sanders pick, but I think this one's a little bit better of an example of just letting the player fall to you. This is a guy who, before I think the draft, he did suffer a torn pectoral in the pre-draft process. I believe it was either at the Senior Bowl or slightly after it, but he did have an issue that did force him down the boards. I believe before that, he would have been maybe a top 100, maybe top 125 selection. I believe he is like a top 75, top 100 talent, but he is kind of limited to that box safety role at the moment, which is very devalued in today's NFL. But like, as far as a player goes, as far as the mentality you're bringing your team, as far as like the pedigree, the resume he's bringing with him from college, this is a really good talent to be able to pull out in the 6th round. I think he offers them special teams versatility. I think he offers you, like you said, a kind of Kareem Jackson in waiting to kind of develop up a little bit. But really, I just love the selection. This is a guy I was looking forward to throughout the entire pre-draft process, was devastated to see him go down. Really loved watching him at the Senior Bowl. Not necessarily a guy you want to leave one-on-one in coverage, but like Bree said, a guy who's just kind of a force over the middle. I think he is a little bit lanky at the moment, so you might have to pack on some of that offseason peanut butter, as Joey and Vox Lombardi love to point out. But once he gets that going a little bit, I think he will be a force over the middle, brings a lot of good energy and a lot of good leadership traits, I think, to the defense. And I think, when you talk about, again, the special teams productivity that I think he's going to bring, I think he's going to be huge there. So player I really like to see. Will be interesting seeing how they manage the safety room going forward, because I believe that's a 6 deep, maybe 7 deep room right now. And that's going to be, there's a lot of deep rooms in this roster.
I just want to shout out to Jolene, who's over in the YouTube chat real quick. JL Skinner was BPA for me. Very excited for this pick. Jolene, we really appreciate, we never get to see you on live. So thanks for joining us while we discuss the draft picks here. Joey, on to you. Gray, tell me how you feel about the player.
Yeah, I'm giving it a B+ straight off the bat. Like Frankie said, it was a great example of just letting best player available fall to you, and he did late in the draft. It was great. Also a position that I think, I don't know. As Frankie also said this, it's loaded in that safety room. It's tough. It's going to be tough, but he does bring a completely different skill set to that safety room. No one has the length of an JL Skinner in that group. Nobody comes down and hits like JL Skinner in that safety group that's currently on the roster, obviously. So yeah, I give it a B+. I think it's really good. My only worry, I guess, would be sometimes these taller guys, and from what I've seen, they have a hard time getting out of their breaks really fast. It comes with the territory of being this tall, freak, safety guy. It's hard playing in space when you're that big, straight up. So I have it at B+. I like it.
Yeah, it's an A for me. I was a little negative on other ones. I think this is a slam dunk. You got a player that should have gone a lot earlier in the draft. I think it's a role they needed to fill. He's going to contribute on special teams. Unlike earlier rounds, I don't worry about the opportunity cost in the 6th round. It's not like, again, earlier areas. And yeah, he's an amazing player. And I'm a little more optimistic about, I think he is limited to being a box safety now, but seeing him work to the boundary, he didn't have to move backwards so much, but he did have to cover a good bit of space at times in that Boise State defense. And I think he did it well. So I think, and he's a good athlete, there's chance to grow beyond that box only role. So I'm a big fan of it. A.
I like that optimism. We'll move on to the last of the litter. Broncos draft Oregon center Alex Forsyth with the 257th overall pick. Guys, this one's interesting, right? It was a position of need. Obviously, the Denver Broncos have been looking to improve their offensive line. Probably not an instant impact player, but I think Sean Payton is all in on Cushenberry. Seems to be the direction that they're headed. I'm not going to say it's set in stone. Things can change, but protecting whoever is the quarterback of the next season and the Broncos' future is going to be severely important. I'm hoping Forsyth can pick it up quickly. How'd you feel about the pick, Frankie? And give me a grade. I got a B- in this one.
I'll probably go I'll go a B. It's a slap single to me. This is a pick that, I really wanted to see them at least add some depth along the trenches at some point along this draft. They ended up doing that. Center was, in my opinion, still a pretty big need for them. One thing I guess I do have a little bit of concern over, I don't want to say the player, but The big issue with Lloyd has been kind of his play strength, his ability to actually knock players back in the run game, really his physicality that he plays with. I don't see Forsyth necessarily being too big of a swing in the other direction. Doesn't play with the heaviest hands, but he is pretty clean in the pass pro game. That might get a hold once in a while, but generally keeps his quarterbacks very clean. But this is kind of what you want to see out of a day 3 pick. I think this is a perfect 7th rounder. You get a guy that I think has some value, has a lot of experience playing against good competition. And I think he fills, a decent need for them. Not trying to say you want to end up narrowing yourself down to any positions, but again, this team really lacked depth along the interior. I think this selection is better than having to go through the UDFA pool. So I think it's a great pick for them. I think it's awesome to see that he was able to, or not awesome for him that he was able to slide, but that Denver was able to kind of catch him sliding with 3 picks before the draft, and they had to go to battle with everybody in the UDFA realm.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, Frankie, I agree with you. I'm giving this an A because I think that in the 7th round, even if you're able to find, this is the example of it working out perfect. Not only in the 7th round did somebody at a position of need follow you, it's somebody that you think is good enough, or I personally think is good enough to serve as depth. Those are 2 big swing and hits in the 7th round. It's so rarely do these guys even make the roster coming out at this pick. I.e. Faion Hicks last year. I didn't think he played very good, and I don't think he's going to make the roster this next year. It's just is what it is. So I think that personally at center, he's going to walk in and be the 2nd best center immediately on this team. Do I think that he's a starter? Because that is something that is thrown around. No, it's not. But yeah, I like it.
Yeah, I'm a big fan. Really surprised you could get him in the 7th round. This is a player lauded for being really smart, did a lot at the line of scrimmage for the Oregon Ducks last year. Versatility, has played every spot along the interior for the Oregon Ducks. He's not really a Sean Payton offensive lineman like Frankie said, but everything else you got to love about the pick. And he's not too tall for Russ, so that's a nice bonus. It's unreal they got him at this point in the draft. I think, it's a slam dunk A. I wish they added more along the trenches, but A, killer.
Awesome. All right, guys. Frankie, give me an overall Denver Broncos 2023 draft letter grade, and then tell everyone where they can find your absolute stellar work.
So I'm going to go with a B. I've kind of gone with the mindset. I think this was a mission accomplished draft. I think you go in saying you want to add talent to the roster. But when I look at overall, the players that I'm not going to give it an A, I think I'm a tough grader because I'd say I don't think that they caught too much excess capital. Yes, I think they caught excess players that were falling in Drew Sanders. But when I think about the players that fell to them, I understand why they fell. I understand why Drew Sanders, a little bit of a projection based, right now really just an off-ball blitzer for you, fell to where he did. I understand why players like J.L. Skinner coming off the pec injury fell. I'm hyped that they did, and I'm glad Denver did catch them sliding, but I'm not pretending oh man, they caught this guy who I really think was a 1st rounder in the 3rd round. I don't think it was necessarily that, so I'd say it was a B for me, not yet an A, but still a good draft for Denver. And then where to find me? Frankie's Film. I'm throwing up all the tape. I've been grinding through hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of snaps. I'm through 400 Alex Forsyth snaps. I have 400 more to go to get through his 2022 season. And then Thursdays, show with Joey. It's going to be over here. Make sure you're tuning in over here, obviously Monday, Wednesday, and Friday as well. And then also with the Irish NFL show, I get to interview a lot of cool people over there, get to ask a lot of fun questions. Had a cool NFL draft scout, Matt Miller. I just said his Twitter handle. That was weird. But had a fun question to him about J.L. Skinner. If you want to go check that out, they're a great group of people. Love getting to work with those guys. So yeah, check me out. Check it all out. Check it out. Boom.
Yeah.
Check it out. Don't throw up any more tape though, Frankie. Joey.
Yeah, everybody follow me at JR Drafts on Twitter. I've been tweeting a ton recently through this NFL draft. I can plan on continuing to do so. So yeah, make sure you're following me there. Make sure you're following everything Let's Talk Broncos. If you're listening on Mile High Sports right now, make sure you're going to the Let's Talk Broncos YouTube, hitting that subscribe button. That's where you're going to find Frankie and I's show. If you enjoyed us two on this one, you'll really enjoy it on the other as well. So make sure you're going to do that. But yeah, that's all I really have, guys.
Overall grade.
Overall grade. I want to change Mims to a B- because I really thought about it. I don't really care about that. The trade kind of sucked, but it is what it is. It's not huge. And then I'm going to give the The overall grade a B.
Got it.
Frankie.
Zach Seegers, overall grade. Where can everybody find your stuff?
Yeah, lots of disagreement on the individual, but not on the big thing. I'm going to say a B- for my overall. So just a little under you guys. I think it's good, but I won't be surprised if a year from now we're like, wow, they got to spend a lot of money on the offensive line and defensive line, and they are not able to. You can find me over on Twitter at Zach_Seegers and here on YouTube. I keep saying it literally every show, but we've got so much exciting stuff happening on the Let's Talk Broncos YouTube. I don't want you to miss out, so go there.
I love it. I think I'm going to go B+ because I really like what happened here. I like the players that were chosen. As somebody who ended the last season absolutely down in the dumps, I'm a little bit more optimistic once I saw what Sean Payton, George Payton, and crew were able to do here. I like it. I'm even on the border of a A- B+, but I'm going to go B+ so I don't throw all of Broncos country into absolute shock. Go follow me, Brie Maestas 303 over on Twitter so you can see all the other things that I'm popping onto. I like to jump on the radio every once in a while, talk some all types of sports. I don't only talk Broncos, I talk everything else. We're going to get going because Let's Talk Broncos crew has a Nuggets game to catch, but we appreciate you watching. Subscribe, and Zach already said it. There's a lot of cool stuff coming up, so you want to stay tuned. We'll talk to you on Wednesday. Good night, Broncos country.